Hello and welcome on in, everybody. Good to see you. My name is Sam Peterson. I'm going to be your host for today's Photoshop challenge. If you want to get the starter file that has the resources for this particular challenge, make sure to click the link in the description below. So today, we're going to be creating a cool kind of superpower-esque freezing effect. I'll show you a quick example of what that might look like. Something a little bit like this. Frozen hands, shooting a beam of kind of frost, I suppose. So I hope you enjoy this one. I think this is kind of fun. I always enjoy doing these sort of superhero type effects. So the first thing that we're going to do to get right into this challenge is we're going to adjust the coloration. Now, I usually save these steps towards the end of the challenge, the end of my designs, but I want to kind of prep this scene to be a little bit less warm and a little bit more cool to fit our effect. So first what I'm going to do is go into Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to do a couple kind of pre-made filters of sorts. The first is going to be a photo filter. Click OK on that. And you can see we have these different filters, warming, cooling, different colors. I'm going for one of these cooling filters, and I'm going to cycle through with my arrow key. I think the first and the third look pretty good, but I'm going to go with this one, cooling filter 82. So next I'm going to go and add a color lookup layer, another sort of like pre-made adjustment layer. You can do all these manually with hue and saturation adjustment layers or color balance, but I thought these kind of had a cool effect, so I'm going to use them. We're going to go into Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and Color Lookup here. I'll click OK. And I'm going to kind of cycle through these. You can see a lot of different effects they have. Actually, if I close this, I'll take off my first adjustment layer so you can see how the effect looks by itself. But a lot of times these have kind of like neat pre-made looks that you might enjoy. Personally, I'm going to use Foggy Night for this. Now I'm going to put my other one back on, but the thing is Foggy Night is way too intense, way too dramatic. I like what it does, but I just like a little bit of what it does. So I'm going to take the opacity of that layer over in the Layers panel. And I'm going to move it down, maybe to like 40%, something like that. I think that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to merge these together. What I want to do is duplicate my original layer. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that. I just like making backups. I can just call this like original backup. And I'm going to clip these to my layer, right click, do create clipping mask, and that way I can just merge these all down. I'm going to shift click all of them, right click, and do merge layers. So now we got our adjusted coloration, and we got our backup in case we need it. So from here, what I want to do is I want to cut out the background from the foreground. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to back this one up too. So I'm going to duplicate it twice with Control or Command J. That way we have our backup one. I can do color. I can just call this like color backup in case I need it later. And we're going to have this one on the bottom be background. And this one on the top is going to be our figure. This is just going to give us some flexibility. So I'm going to go ahead and isolate my figure from the background first. And I'm going to do that by selecting, I like to use the quick selection tool. But if you grab a selection tool like that, you can do select subject. You'll see this button here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and click select subject. And we'll see what the AI of Photoshop does. It does a pretty good job. It kind of missed an area here. So I'm going to hold on Shift to add to my selection with the quick selection tool. Control Z to try that again. And just grab any areas I feel like could use a little refinement. I did notice the ear here. You can zoom in if you need a little more precision. I noticed the ear wasn't quite selected. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe this thumb could be adjusted just a touch. So a lot of times Photoshop has some really great tools that do 99% of the work for you, and then you can always manually adjust it if you need. I want to adjust it a little further, so I'm going to go into Select and Mask up here at the top. I'm going to click that. And I'm going to click the Refine Edge Brush tool over here on the left second from the top. This is often good for... Whoops, let me try that again. Select Mask. Let's see here. I think I may have just gotten rid of my mask there. Let's try this again real quick, grab these areas. Doesn't need to be perfect. Can always refine this later. Go in and do selected mask. Yeah, I think I hit some sort of hotkey here. But we'll go ahead and leave that there. I think that's going to do a pretty good job. So I'm going to select the button at the bottom here, this rectangle, that's add layer mask. And my hope is that, we got a pretty nice selection here, isolated that from the background. So now what I want to do is I want to get rid of the character, the figure on the background here. So we got our figure and I want to isolate my background now. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to right click the mask that we have and do add mask to selection. So that gives us the same selection that we just had. But what I want to do is go to select and I can modify my selection. Modify, expand, and I'm going to do like 40 pixels, something really big. And it's just going to give us this clean selection around. And I'm going to select my background layer. This is just so I don't have to manually select it with the lasso tool, which you can totally do. But I find that this gives me a little bit more precision and it can be pretty quick. So I'm going to go to edit and I'm going to go to content aware fill. And from here, you can sample the area you want it to select from. So basically it's going to try to fill in the selected area based on the area that we're sampling. If this was like a sky that we were filling in and there's grass below, you would just select the sky or whatever area you wanted to sample from, but this is all a single texture, so I'm just going to click OK. So from here, I can hide my figure layer. It created a new layer for the content aware fill, so I'm going to merge that together with my background. Just rename that to background. And I think that looks pretty good. If you want to clean up the background a bit, you can with the stamp tool or perhaps the patch tool. I'm going to go ahead and select the patch tool over here on the left. And I can always just kind of click and drag to try to clean up some of those seams. But I think it looks kind of organic as is. Not too bad, so you can kind of adjust that if you want. So from here, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and duplicate our figure. So I'm going to put the background back in. And now we have our figure. And I'm going to duplicate this once. I'm going to apply the layer mask that we have by right-clicking it and do apply layer mask. And from here, I just want to isolate the arms. So I'm going to select the arms. I'm going to select my lasso tool. Click and hold that tool to get the lasso tool. If you don't already have it selected, just go around the edge here. And I'm giving myself some ample room. I'm selecting a little past the arm on both sides because we're going to mask this off later. So it doesn't need to be perfect right now. But I'm going to select this mask button at the very bottom below the layers panel. And that's going to isolate the arms for us. Now we have the arms on one layer and we have the figure on another layer. So we kind of have all these pieces in place now. So I'm going to just label this arms. So we got our background, our figure, and our arms all on separate layers. The last thing I'm going to do for this step is I'm going to desaturate the arms, and we're going to do this sort of like frozen, frosty arm effect. And the first step of that is going to be desaturating it. So I'm going to click Control U, or if you want to, you can do an adjustment layer. You can always go to Image, Adjustment to do this manually, but I like to use the hotkeys. So you can see Control U is listed for hue and saturation. That's one I use a lot, so I tend to memorize the hotkeys for those repeated actions. And I'm just going to crank down the saturation all the way. And we are good to go there. So I just want to take a quick moment to say hey to everyone in the chat. Cody, Ted, what's going on, everybody? General Kenobi, good to see you. Welcome on in. Umacorn, what's going on? Anki, Frank, everyone's here. Michelle, good to see y'all. I just want to remind you guys that we are reviewing all these challenges in the Discord. So if you haven't joined the Discord, definitely check that out. And on the last day of week 2, which will be Friday, the second Friday, so not this coming Friday, but the next one, we're going to be doing a sort of review stream. So if you have any questions throughout these 2 weeks for techniques or anything that you wanted clarified or demoed, It's kind of a free form format on Friday, so if you do want me to cover any certain topics, think about it, let me know on Friday, or even shoot me a message on Discord. I can kind of make a note of it. I just wanted to give everyone a reminder for that. But yeah, it's good to see everybody. Welcome on in. Hey Megan, how you doing? So let's get into the next step, which is going to be creating the frost effect for the arms. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take these arms that we created, the arm layer, the desaturated ones, and we're going to want to go up to filter, filter gallery, and I'm going to zoom out holding Alt or Option and clicking. Zoom in a little bit more, and we're going to go to artistic. Under artistic, we can do plastic wrap. So the plastic wrap is going to give us the bulk of the icy effect. I find that highlight strength maxed out at 20 is the best. Detail maxed out at 15 is the best. Smoothness is kind of up to you. I have it at 12, but the more you put it down, the more detailed it becomes. The more you put it up, the smoother and less detailed it becomes. I kind of like an in-between of 12, so that's what I'm going to select here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take these arms and we're going to set the blending mode to screen. So it changes right there. You can see screen, we'll see through it a bit. And now what I want to do is colorize this. So the next step is actually going to be applying a hue and saturation adjustment layer. But first what I want to do is group these arms just by themselves. So I'm going to do Control or Command G. You can also right click it and do group from layers. But this way the hue and saturation will apply to the overall image and not just like the screen transparency that we were getting. So I'm going to do a hue and saturation adjustment layer, go up to layer, new adjustment layer, hue and saturation, click OK. I'm going to drag this above the group and I'm going to right click and do create clipping mask to clip it to the group itself. Now from here, I want to click colorize and I want to saturate this up a bit, maybe around 40 or 50. But I want to do a bluish color, not so much purple. So we can kind of drag this around, get whatever colors you want. But I think something like this is pretty good for this effect. Maybe somewhere close to 200. Crank the saturation up a touch more. I think that looks pretty good. All right. Yeah, I like that. So what I want to do next is I actually want to duplicate this arms layer. This arm layer that we applied the effect to and is currently on screen, I'll do Control or Command J to apply to that. Now that's going to strengthen the effect, but what I want to do here, oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to mention a very important step. The next step actually is to invert the arms. So from here, I'm going to press Control I to invert the arms. So it's going to get darker. This is very important. So now when we duplicate it, I'm going to go in and take that duplicate arms. We can just call this like arms 2. And I'm going to go to filter. I'm going to go to filter gallery yet again, but this time instead of artistic section, we're going to go to the distort section. And I'm going to go to glass. So this is kind of a frosted glass effect. This is a really cool combination of effects to get this sort of look. I do find it's hard to see how this effect is truly going to look before you click OK and see it all together and colorized. So keep in mind you may need to A/B it and see. But what I'm going to do is have distortion to 6, smoothness to 3, and scaling to 90. Now you can play around with these, see how they look. I think if you go too high in the distortion, it kind of loses the detail. But I do like some texture. So if you go down all the way in distortion, it's kind of smooth again. I like that mid ground right there. Smoothness, you can play around with that. Mine is at 3. But again, it kind of gets rid of some of the texture. I like a little bit of texture in mine, so I'm keeping it at 3. Scaling doesn't have a huge impact, but you can try that. It varies it up a little bit. So I'm going to click OK here. A, B it, and C. Yeah, I feel like that's starting to become my catchphrase. All right, so next what I want to do is we got our arms in place. And let's see here. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Before I did apply a levels adjustment because the hand is fairly bright. The stock photo that I'm using has a light shining on the hand. I think we'll leave it for now, but if you want to adjust it, you can always do like a masked levels adjustment layer or something like that. All right, so next what I want to do is I want to actually have a smooth transition from the arm to the ice effect. Right now it's kind of going in too far. So what we can do is we can click our group and we can apply a mask to the actual group. Now I like to use a textured brush for this masking, but if you just have a soft round brush, that works just fine too. But the little trick is that black conceals and white reveals. So if you want to bring it back, paint with white in the mask. If you want to cover it up, paint with black. So this is a soft round brush, but what I want to use is a cool little textured brush I have, this messy brush, and you can kind of see the texture of it. It's kind of got a nice pattern for this ice, but I'm going to crank the flow down really low, probably below 10 or below, sub 10, and then I'm just going to kind of paint over here to get this more natural feeling transition in the arm. Now, like I said, if you're painting with a mouse, the key is oftentimes to use a lower flow. And if you're painting with a soft round brush, a lot of times to get smooth gradients, you want to use a bigger brush. So bigger brush, lower flow, oftentimes is my little tip for these. So I think that looks pretty good. The last thing that I think I want to do here is give this a little bit of a glow. So we got a nice transition, but I'm going to actually double click the group layer here to access the layer styles. From here, what I want to do is I want to add an outer glow and an inner glow. So I'm going to click outer glow, and you can see my settings, they're already set up. The opacity is at 30. That's really going to determine like how intense this glow is. The blue, I chose a blue here. I chose a bright blue color. So you're going to want to choose a color that's, I would say like the shade of blue that the arms are brighter, since it's going to be a glowing effect. You could go even a little warmer, like slightly, blue-green, slightly teal, but I think that looks good. The size is going to be how much it's spread out. So I'm going to max this out at 250, and that looks pretty good. The other thing I want to do is inner glow. So you can see that effect as I toggle it on and off. It's just a little bit more in the middle, which I think makes a nice little difference. Opacity's at 40. If I max it out, it gets a bit more intense, which actually looks pretty cool. I could crank that up a bit higher. And then choke is at 10, size is at 120. Again, the size is going to largely affect how much it's spread out. And you can always toggle these on and off together or toggle off the individual effects to see how each one is affecting it. But I think that looks pretty good. All right, I think that brings us to the end of our frosted arm effect. So I'm going to save it. Always good to save. Now the next step that we're going to do is we're going to be creating a magical sort of spell effect. This is a spell effect that I use for like all sort of, I was going to say, I guess all sorts of spells and magic effects that I use. I use it for that all the time. Some of you may have seen this technique in the past. I use it a lot. But what we're going to do is group all these layers together. Control G, Control or Command G, and I'll just put figure. This is our figure. This is our frost effect. This is just so you can see it easier in my layers panel, so those previous layers won't confuse you, because all those steps are complete. The next step is to create this magical spell effect. So I'm going to create a new layer, Control or Command Shift N. I'm going to call it screen, because it's a screen layer, and I'm going to set it to screen in the blending mode. I am now going to create a new layer, Control or Command Shift N. I'm going to call this paint. I'm going to leave it as a normal layer blending mode. I am now going to go down to this little quick menu at the bottom of my layers panel, the circle. Click that and create a gradient map adjustment layer. And the key to this is to have a gradient that starts with black. This is the most important thing. It won't work if it doesn't start with black. Have a gradient that starts with black and basically ends with white is the key to making this effect work. So I have a bunch of gradients already created. You can see they all start with black. And I'm going to use this one because this is kind of my blue magic effect, and I think it works perfectly for this ice effect. Now what I'm going to do is take this gradient map and this paint layer, the last two that I created, shift click to select them both, right click them and do create clipping mask to clip them both to the screen layer. Now really important is I need to fill the screen layer in with black. So I'm going to press G for my fill bucket fill that in with black, and we're good to go. So from here, essentially how this works is that it's going to map different levels of opacity and values to the gradient map that we created. So the paint layer is the only layer we want to be affecting. I'm going to take my gradient map and controller command click my screen layer to lock them. Now we can only mess with our painting layer. So basically, if I choose white, I like to paint in white here. I'm going to turn my flow up. And then I can take my smudge tool and smudge it around to create this sort of magic effect. And it basically, like I said, gradates the different levels of opacity to the different values in the effect. So you could use a soft round brush here. You don't need to be using the really hard brush I have. You can kind of see that effect that it has. But I like to use this hard brush and then smudge it. And if you do want to do that technique, it's more of a painting technique. My smudge tool is a soft round brush. It's set to 50% up at the top. And if you go into window brush settings, scattering is checked on and set at 10%. This is very intensive on your computer. I never dare to size up my brush really large and use it. It'll just lag my computer into oblivion. So be careful, keep the brush pretty small. And also if you lower the spacing of the brush in the brush settings, that will help as well. But there's various ways you can use this like I mentioned. So I'm going to delete all that. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select the elliptical marquee tool. So we're going to create like this power beam. Holding shift and pressing spacebar to move it and shift to constrain it to a circle. So position it right there. I'm then going to go click and hold on my lasso tool to select the polygonal lasso tool. So from here, what I want to do is I want to hold on shift to add to the selection, click, and I want to make this kind of beam that's going like that. I'm going to select the endpoint to create that selection. I'm going to press G for my fill bucket. I'm going to fill it in with white right there. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to right click this beam, this paint layer, convert to smart object, because we're going to apply a blur to this, and this just gives us flexibility with adjusting the blur after the fact. But if you go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I think something like 30 looks pretty good. Even from there, I could create a mask on that paint layer that I just created, and you can get a little bit more variety. So if I'm using black to conceal, painting on the mask, you can kind of paint softly and get some cool gradations there, which is a nice little touch. So from here, we kind of have our beam, but you can do so much with this. I don't have too much more time, so we'll get into it real quick, but we can do the painting method this time. I used shapes for the last one, but you can also kind of do this like cool, like electric rings around it. I feel like that's a common superpower effect you see on like these beams. There's like kind of these electricity rings around them. If you have a tablet or anything, you can get really into painting these. It's a lot of fun. You can also do this with a mouse. Crank your smoothing up. When you have the brush selected, there's smoothing at the top. That's a great way. But just kind of painting on these. And lastly, what you could do, and I put this on a new layer, mind you, this ring, I put that on a new layer. I'll create another new layer, and you could even do this with a sort of particle effect. So I'm showing you kind of 3 ways you can play around with these superpower effects. But if you go to, I have Kyle's special effects brushes. I love these. You can kind of do these like little particle effects, which are really neat. You can mask this out to make it exactly what you want. But what you could even do here is go to filter, blur, and put a motion blur on these. Do it in the direction that his arm's facing, this diagonal, and kind of play around with different levels. And you'll kind of see you get the gradient within those a bit that the blur creates. Now we could always mask this out. Take my soft round brush that I use for masking, painting with black in a mask that we just created, and toning it down wherever you want. But that's pretty much it. The last thing I would like to do, if we do have some time, is I think because this is such a bright effect, I want to create a new layer, and this is going to be a multiply layer. And I'm going to darken down the background because I think these effects work best when they're on a a darker background. It really allows this to pop. So I'm choosing a desaturated kind of mid-tone purple on a multiply layer right over the background layer, and I think that kind of sets the stage a little bit more. So that is it. I'm out of time, everybody. I tried to fit in a lot to this one, so really have fun with it, kind of play around with it however you want. I hope you enjoyed this. Make sure to join the Discord. This is where you can post challenges, share with the community. We have a lot of mentors giving feedback, myself included. There's a lot of great entries that I've been seeing. I think these ones are from Frank. These are amazing. Definitely check it out. And again, on the Friday of next week, we'll be doing a review stream. So if you have any questions or anything like that, definitely keep them in mind. But these have been looking great. Check the description below for all the links, the starter files, everything you need, the Discord links and the challenge links as well. But yeah, it's been awesome seeing all your challenges. You guys have been doing a great job. Appreciate you guys hanging out with me today. And I will see you next time. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks again. I appreciate it.